Hello, my friend. Welcome back to another episode of the podcast. I hope you're well, and I hope you're grooming yourself to look presentable to the world at large. It's quite a performance we have to keep up with, right? Every day we have to sit there and we have to fucking impress people. We have to impress ourselves. We have to go through this entire dialogue of doing stuff, and then we go into the cycle of why am I doing it? Am I worth doing it? It's fucking never ending. But I've been thinking, man, it's crazy that there is this constant back and forth in different spaces of the mind, right? Like when you want to improve, you have these standards, and everyone talks about goals, how you can achieve those goals, and if you don't, you're a failure, and you need to pivot, and in all contexts, right? And then you have people who are like, no, I'm not going to do that. That's the thing which is going to ruin me. And then you have people who are like, no, but that's the only way forward. And then you have people who are like, I'm going to escape from all that and do something that really means something to me. Is it easy to take a step out of this shit and just go look at it going, is this a great movie? Or are we all a part of it? And I find that quite fascinating, because it's quite amazing that there's 7 billion people and everyone has this going on in their head at some point, at some level, it's at any kind of person, right? Whether for various reasons, like the stories are different, but there is a story which is conflict based. There's a story which is desire based. There is so many things. It's like we have 7 billion various things simultaneously going on, and I don't know, it's mental, right? You have cruelty, you have heartbreak, you have sadness, you have all of it. And yeah, what I find crazy about it is that how, I don't know, there are a few people who can control the narrative, right, for everyone. And how we are how we succumb to that craziness. Like, I don't know, man. It's like, if you look at all the leaders, if you look at all the politicians, all the autocrats, all the military leaders, all the priests, all the religious people, and yeah, 70, 80 million, maybe 10% of the population, and they control 7 billion minds. I don't know if I've already spoken about this. Also, I'm kind of hesitant. Did I speak about this on the podcast? Did I speak about this with someone? Very strange. It feels like deja vu. It's one of those weird. If I already have, I apologize. I tend to repeat myself. But if I haven't, it's amazing how we can all fall victim to is it laziness or playing to or just playing to something that's already been taken care of by someone else. You're like, fucking, it's just easy, man. I can't. I do fall for the shopping, the consumerism. And of course, I subscribe to everything that was mainstream and that was given to me. And the aspirations, the need, the greed, the desire, the seek for validation, for fame, for fortune. I've fucking been there, and I'm glad to say I'm no longer there. I mean, it keeps pulling back, right? It's like one of those whorehouses that you visit once in a while, which you say no more. It's like a cigarette. It's like smoking. You've been there, and you always like, what'll happen if I just do one more cigarette? Yeah, exactly, just cigarettes and whorehouses. Very common, very similar, but it's a very strong grip, because everywhere around you it's like that, and you really have to go out of your way to find someone, or find a group of people, or find just a way of life that isn't like that, because it's not something that is preferred, because you aren't going to be appreciated for that, and you're going to be thrown things at, like, oh, fucking hippie, or a crazy person, or psycho, loner, just all these weird things, because there are a lot of people, fortunately, who are doing things that they want to do because they want to do it, and not just sort of following the lead as is told to them. But it is very difficult to do that, and I don't know, I don't have the answers. Like in comedy as well, I really enjoyed it, but it started taking over in the other context, right? The other non-essential things. Of course, it's not it is something you've got to focus on. But when it takes over from the idea of making people laugh, and it becomes the main narrative of, oh, why am I not getting to this place of recognition? Why am I not getting to this place of selling out certain number of tickets? Why am I not getting recognized by the platforms? It keeps you wanting, and that's what the system and the industry does in all aspects, whether it's corporate, IT, banking. You just are you are just made to feel that you're not ever there yet. It's this constant need to kind of fight for more, to compete for more, to put down others for more, put down yourself because you didn't get where you were supposed to get, and it's constantly keeping you in flux and off balance. And you're never kind of going to look within and say, you know what, I know what I'm worth. It's never the case, because you're constantly being thrown under the bus because someone else is better than you and you're better than someone else, and it just tears you in different directions. And that's what happened in my stand-up thing. And I was just kind of focusing on the conversations that weren't as important as just being fucking funny on stage. And I'm just talking about this today because I didn't really have any planned idea. It's just this thing which has been working on my mind in a sense over the past few years, because as an individual, you kind of are living a lot of the time without realizing what you're doing, and you just sort of get by, and it's good. Some people enjoy it. I've enjoyed it. It's hard to kind of take a step back and be aware of what you're doing, when you're doing, why you're doing what you're doing. But when you do actually go down that path, you kind of are like, fuck, wait a second, what the hell have I been doing all this time? And many people, including myself, you kind of get into situations without knowing it, and 10 years later you're like, whoa, where the hell did I come down and how did I get here? And yeah, it's interesting, and it's weird. It's weird how easy it is to get drawn into it and sucked into this need for more, and this need for the approval from what you might call it the machine or the system or the structure, or whatever it may be, right? In whatever field of work, whether if you're in the arts or whether you're in the financial, legal, technology sector, it's not the nature of work, it's the nature of people who are delegating or who are providing that kind of work, right? It's the kind of it's the environment within which ideas are worked on by people. It's however great the idea, however good the intention of that idea, however amazing the person who comes up, the innovators, the inventors. What's happening now is I feel this is fucking present across the board, right? In music, in stand-up, in the fine arts, in theater, in corporate law, in advertising, marketing, and in anything. It's just like I mean, competition's great, but if it comes from a place where you know what you are and you can compete, it's good. But you're never let to know, or you're never let to know, what the fuck? You're never given a chance to know what and who and why you are what you are, because it's always from one thing to another thing, from one thing to another thing, the next thing to the next thing, and just push this guy, push this girl, keep her unbalanced, keep her constantly doubting herself, and that way we can fucking turn their work into profits, into money. And it's not a conspiracy, fuck it. If it is and you think it is, then do let me know. But I really think it's something that I got tired of, and I still sometimes I'm like, fuck, what am I doing? I need to be back there, I need to get on stage, I need to fucking sell out. But I'm like, nah, it's okay. I mean, if I need to, I'll need to, but when I want to. It's hard, but it's important. And I didn't mean to go down this path today. I really didn't have anything planned, because I sometimes just want to sit in front of the mic and talk to you without, and yeah, none of my introductions are scripted, nor my conversations, but sometimes when people say that they definitely want you to know that they haven't, but I just usually have some thought, like whether when I read something or when I listen to something, and today I genuinely just switched on the mic and I was like, let's find out what this brain, this mind, this body will throw out of the face, and this is what it decided to do. And it's fun. Sometimes it's just like the other part is like, what are you talking about? Is that what they want to hear? You are going on about some shit sounding like a pretentious philosophical little prick. But hey, you got to trust in yourself and let go. That's what I decided to do right now. And let me just wind this up, right? Because I think everyone has a great I think everyone's life is a story that is important. I think everyone's life is, I don't want to sound cliched by saying it's theirs to live. Of course it's theirs to live. Who the fuck? But having said that, it's not theirs to live because it's clearly being directed by someone or some people and not letting the person live their life. And that is something that is really sad. And of course, there are problems like poverty, and there is problems like war and famine and lack of food, and there is hatred, and there is a lot of violence. And that's sadly that's what it is. Some people have it, some people don't. Some people have to experience that, some people don't. But it's across the board. It's exploitation, right? On different levels. You might think someone sitting in a glass skyscraper in Zurich is really, really fucking fortunate. Of course, more fortunate than the person who doesn't have clean water, or is being shelled continuously because they just happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, or born into a certain country at the wrong time. But everything is a part of the same system. And the same people are interlinked and connected to bring about this system and make it work seamlessly. From the person who owns that bank or that hedge fund that owns the glass tower, controls the person sitting there, and to the investments that person might make, which go into creating these wars to get resources or to build a political bloc that will ensure certain strength for a certain group of countries versus others. So it's just a fucked up situation. I don't know what other words to use to describe it, because it's easier to just succumb to what is around you and say, you know what, I will play to this. And of course, I'm not judging anyone for doing it, because I totally am. I really am not. But it is something that when you are aware of it, it is interesting to see and learn about what you want. I wouldn't say out of life, because life is going to throw whatever it has got to throw at you, but how you are made with everything that you've done, with experiences, with the inputs you've put into your mind and body, and how that can navigate the environment and this thing we call this experience we call life. It's quite a fascinating path once you're on it, and there are different labels for it, different words for it. But it's just that when you start looking at when you start kind of stop focusing on the distractions, which is of course achievement, success, and material sort of building, or material kind of the material value system. It's just an interesting place, because you really can spend time without external tools or external mechanisms, and kind of just sit there and go, wait a second, it's quite a deep place if I want to go deep, or it's just quite an interesting place to be, and it's all yours. And once you start like sort of understanding that, you can just sort of have fun with it and realize what sort of your demons are, if you want to call it, or what your friends in there are, and who you are to yourself, and maybe even what actually living and experiencing this life might mean for you. So it's pretty crazy. And you might realize that, shit, I hate that music. I don't find anything funny in that way, but I really love watching this because I like this kind of thing which stimulates my feelings. Or I really didn't realize that this person sucks balls. So yeah, I don't know. It's something that I've kind of just been feeling and looking at, and I just want to share that with you. And having said that, my guest on today's episode is a person who helps people figure out relationships with themselves and with each other. Men and men, men and girls. No, men and men and women. I don't know if you say men and girls, you should be careful. Men and girls, of course, of legal age. Men and men, men and girl, men and women, women and women, whatever. Relationships. That's why you're going well with relationships, but then you had to go add finer details and fucked it up. But there are a lot of things, nuances that are surrounding dating. There's a lot of stigma. There's a lot of stuff that people don't want to talk about and don't want to share. They don't want to display things that are truly theirs. And this sort of ties into what I just spoke about. They want to project this sense of a certain identity that they think that people want. While it might not be who they really are. And there are these very interesting things that you need to figure out, like vulnerability, how much to show and how much not to show, how to navigate a real world, a virtual world, dating apps. And my guest today is Hayley Quinn. She's a coach and a dating coach at that. And I didn't know that there are coaches, because when I was growing up, there was no coaches except the guy who threw the cricket ball at your face. There were no other, and of course in sport. And Hayley is based in London, and she helps a lot of people, and she's a top coach in her field. And today we talk about exactly that: relationships, how to navigate this crazy, crazy world where everyone wants to be seen as a hero or a heroine, and everyone wants to show only their strong side. It's a fun conversation with a very well-informed human being, and I really appreciate her if she's listening. Hayley, thanks for joining me, and you are in store for a treat of a conversation with Hayley Quinn and me, SoapyRao, on the SoapyRao show. As always, I appreciate you for tuning in. And till next week, and till whatever fate has in store for us, take care of yourselves. Goodbye. God bless. Cheers. Catch you on the other side. Hello, Hayley Quinn. Welcome to the SoapyRao show. Thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Well, it's my pleasure to talk to someone who knows the intricacies of human dating and mating. I don't know if that's the right word, but let me just get into this thing that's been on my mind when it comes to connection, right? Why is in an age where there's information, there's access, there's community, there's online options, everything seems like it's designed for human beings to be together. Yet why is it so difficult for someone to find someone else who's a partner, someone compatible, someone they can call a companion, someone they can rely on in an age like this?
I think there's so many issues that are coming together that make this. I'm sure that if we interviewed someone from 100 years ago, they would complain that dating was difficult then too. But for the modern era, I think there's definitely things that have arisen which make it harder for people to perhaps achieve what you might think is the most simple thing or the most natural thing that people might want to achieve in life. First of all, we have a lot more freedom and a lot more choice. And there's lots of benefits to that. You know, I think, again, if we went back 100 years ago, there'd be lots of people who felt that their sexual preferences weren't allowed or weren't catered for. And there was really only you had one choice on the menu, which was to, form a heterosexual relationship and get married. And now there are many, many different choices.
Or join the church, whichever. Sorry.
Huh?
Or join the church.
Yeah, exactly. There was two. But now there's so much choice, and I think, and there's also not the same perhaps imperative of time limit. Also, our relationships, women don't necessarily in some parts of the world. I'm obviously based here in London, aren't reliant on a man in order to provide for them. So there's not so much necessity around relationships. Yes, we have technology that helps us to meet one another in some way. But again, lots of people would say, does that give us too much choice? Do we lose, with losing the human element, do we no longer remember that it's an actual human being that we're talking to? Do we overswipe? There's also lots of challenges. There's been a pandemic. again, speaking from a sort of London-centric perspective here, they also say we get an extra 10 years of being a teenager from 20 to 30. There's like people are getting married later, having children later, buying houses later. So again, our time frame for which we execute this kind of life plan on has like radically shifted. So I think there's so many different reasons why the path to meeting someone and finding connection may not be straightforward.
Yeah, the thing is, we kind of have this, when you talk about the past, we had this system in India, and it's still there in some places in India. And, there are also the negative sides which come out, which of course aren't, they're horrific. Some of the stories you hear about dowry and the dowry harassment. But the concept of an arranged marriage is that your elders, or so-called people who know more than you, are giving this this setup for you because they think that it will economically benefit you or your family, or it puts you on this path which they think is better for you. And a lot of families, and my parents, I think that their parents met through this concept of an arranged marriage. And of course, you're talking about choice, and we have plenty of that now. And even in a country like India, where there are situations where arranged marriages are prevalent, we of course have Tinder, we have Bumble, a bunch of other apps like Grindr, and it's across, right? You see both contrasting situations. Yet the idea of dating, because technically marriage is to find a partner, procreate, and then you pass on your genes, right? I mean, if you go even further back, the idea. But I'm trying to understand, what is it in today's context? Why is it important to date people and not just go for something like an arranged marriage, and that way you're secure? You have a partner, and they might leave you, which in most cases they are leaving now. They're realizing that, I don't need to be in this crap. So what is the benefit for a human being? Let's not talk about man, woman, or whatever gender, but what is the idea behind dating someone? Maybe that's, I went out a very long route about asking this question, but
I know this might sound strange, but I actually think dating or getting to know other people in a romantic way can also be a way that we learn a lot and understand a lot of things about ourselves. So perhaps our initial idea of who we would connect with usually ends up, I think, being quite far away from who we actually connect with in the world and the real way. And I think in order to discover that, I think meeting, encountering, dating people, also dealing with things like having our hearts broken, or feelings of being misled or being let down. Like, this is, I think, fundamental to like the human experience, and also being able to mature and develop as people to cope with things that may arise. So whilst it's very nice when we hear somebody who met they married their childhood sweetheart that they'd known since they were 6 years old. For a lot of people who are out there, particularly in really metropolitan places like the big cities of the world, who are fighting the good fight, going on many different dates, having lots of different short-term failed relationships, perhaps also experiencing what kind of relationship they want in terms of how much commitment they like. All of this becomes, I think, kind of a learning experience about who we are, who we connect with best, and how to deal with, as I said, sometimes quite emotionally challenging situations.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite fascinating, because for the whole idea, it should be quite straightforward, right? We've been human beings for quite a few hundreds of thousands of years. It should be pretty obvious, like, what, I'm lonely, I'll find someone, right? And some people talk about the tribe, and some people talk about the sense of belonging to something bigger than them. But this sense of isolation is growing. I'm not an expert in this, but even sitting, I've been married for, I should get this right before I go on record, for quite a few years now. And I mean, my wife and I, before that, we were doing long distance, right? She was studying in New York, and I was in Bangalore, and there was a lot of this idea of kind of being a certain kind of boyfriend, right? You mentioned this idea of learning about yourself, and that happened a lot for me, because there was this sense of insecurity that your partner is going to leave you for a guy in New York, in someone in your head, someone better than you, and you get jealous and you start fighting about a situation which hasn't, come up even. And when you fight over Skype, it's really easy to sort of leave it hanging, right? When you leave an online argument, when you leave, because a lot of the stuff is just made up in your head, and you reach a conclusion which is not even in their head possible. So this idea of the lockdown and pandemic, and how did that affect, in your experience, the people you've encountered with people who are dealing with relationships or failed relationships, or with loneliness or isolation? How did this entire thing feature in their life, and how did it affect them?
The pandemic has been a really interesting time for dating. I think probably the most weird thing about it is that dating didn't stop. If anything, it galvanized some people to become clearer that actually this is pretty bad, but it would be significantly better if I had somebody to go through this period in time with. So lots of people found creative workarounds to still continue to meet people in some way or another. So whether that was, we called it here Zoomancing, so conducting your relationships via Zoom, or going on lots of, as again in the UK, very cold walks around the park as your date, as opposed to being able to go out for like drinks or dinner. It also meant that people accelerated the pace of their relationships. So when in the UK we had sort of on and off lockdowns for a while, and that usually meant that people actually made a commitment sooner. They moved in together when perhaps they wouldn't have made that jump without those kind of circumstances surrounding it. So I've also known people who've had long distance lockdown relationships who communicated through the entirety of lockdown. This is like a year, 18 months, only to meet in real life and not find they're attracted to one another. So I think it was lots of people used that time to try and find human connection. But again, like any period in time, there were issues with that. I think the big issues were people probably having somewhat real relationships with people online that just didn't manifest into relationships in reality when that became a possibility. Other people now left on the other side of the pandemic feeling even more pressure. Perhaps the pandemic came at an age in their life where they really wanted to find a partner because they're on a timeline, not self-imposed, usually biologically imposed, to have children. And they feel like they lost 2 years. For myself, I feel like, I was about 6 months pregnant. So when the pandemic started, so for me, it became this very strange shift where I remember almost being, a single woman living and breathing and dating in London, and then suddenly you open the door on the other side and I'm married with 2 children. I'm like, how did that happen? So I think lots of people felt that strange kind of like accelerated pace of life change, and they didn't really quite have time to rationalize everything that went on between point A and point B.
Yeah, that's quite. It almost feels like that was a pause, right? And in some way, it kind of pre-pandemic, there was a certain way you looked at it. Then there was a big pause, and then everything was expedited, right? Like we went into fast forward kind of thing. People are like, you know what? I'm not going to save. I'm not going to live the way I was living before, and it's quite interesting. But you mentioned this word, which is quite a fascinating word for me, because in today's context, you said the reality, right? When people met, and we almost have that world. We have the online world where people have this projected way of looking, or the projection of themselves, whether it's with Instagram and showing the highlights of their lives, or with whatever, it could be Pinterest or could be Facebook. And then you have the real meeting in intimate physical interaction, a human, ancient kind of interaction. So what is there something, I don't know if it's a good or bad, but is there a thing you see where people are really good with that online interaction, but when it comes to the physical, there is a thing, or vice versa? Is there something you observe?
Absolutely. I think this is actually what you mentioned is actually a huge challenge for daters, particularly those that are choosing to meet people purely for whatever reasons online. And it's that feeling of we've got a good connection, or it feels like we have a good connection when we're messaging one another. But then I go on the date and like there's nothing there. And you can see Web 2 dating apps trying to do things to counteract that. They're starting to add videos and voice notes, and you can call somebody in the app. So there's these kind of like, they've increased these layers of the potential to connect inside the app. And I think that's partly because it can be just so difficult to tell who you connect with in reality versus who you seem to connect with online. And I feel like also with the evolution of like Web3 and the metaverse, this is only going to get even more strange and bizarre as we have seemingly seemingly having these interactions online which try to replicate real life.
Yeah.
But there's this sort of unquantifiable ingredients that are missing unless we meet in reality.
Yeah, because you have all these preconceived notions, like even back in 2002 when I traveled to the UK, and you have these things that are fed to you about a certain culture, right? Like, after Swansea, I went to the US, and there's this thing, you watch Friends or you watch certain shows and you think that these are American girls or American women or American men. And you go there thinking that, and it's not always the case, right? You meet a floor mate, and you're like, oh, in your head, you're like, she's like Rachel from Friends, and she's clearly not, and she doesn't like to hear that. And I don't know if that makes sense, but
it does. But I think you're right. We have stereotypes or ideas, and to an extent, I suppose that's somewhat normal, and that's how we get through the world, right? As human beings, we label stuff. We're like, even my toddler knows the difference between a glass and a cup. They're very similar, but he just brackets them differently. So I think it's intrinsic that we try to compartmentalize things. But I think until we have the real world experience of trying to not only meet someone, but form a relationship with them, I think it's very easy to either idealize someone, so to conjure up this fantasy idea of who they are, which probably reflects our only wants, needs, and desires, or various Walt Disney movies, only to realize that it doesn't work, or to kind of stereotype someone without even realizing that we're doing it, just because those stereotypes are floating around our head from all the media that we've consumed over the years of our life.
Yeah, it's so important to have the physical. Rejection hurts. It still hurts a lot when you think about the memory of being rejected, even. But what happens? Like, I give you an example. It's when I went to Swansea, it was the university there. I had no idea what university life was. It was the first time I'm leaving India. Till a week before, I didn't even know I was going to Swansea. Right? It's a pretty big shock, right? Leaving your home, going to this place, and I think it was the week after week of initiation for freshers, right? And we go to this club, and I didn't know most of my hall mates were non-Indian, and even the people who were Indian were second generation, third generation Indian. And I remember a friend saying after the night in the club, he's like, "Did you snog a bird?" And I had no clue what that was, right? And I was baffled, right? Because in my head, he said, no, this is how it is. You go out on the night out, you go on the prowl, whatever the word is, and you kiss a girl. And I'm like, okay, and what happens then? He's like, that's it. You move on to the next girl who was willing to kiss you. I'm like, I thought the girl you kiss is someone you're supposed to spend time with, right? I didn't know that it was so trivial. And it took me by surprise, to say the least. And it sort of framed my entire time at university there was just to snog a bird, but to also not. It skewed my entire way of looking at. I mean, I'm not saying I was like a prude back in Bangalore. It's not like I was like, oh, the first girl I hold hands with after marriage. It's nothing like that. But it was just so trivial. The physical act of kissing or holding hands or even having sex was completely upended on in my life, and I was just like, man, the whole focus of my existence has changed. It's to snog a bird, and it can, and talking about today's day and age, where when I got rejected, I kind of was immersed with a lot of people from the UK and people from the culture of UK, and I say even a Sri Lankan who's lived there. But in today's day and age, I feel a lot of people, when they get rejected, they flock to their own kind. And I didn't have, I had the option, but I didn't. My roommates were all British and all English and Welsh. And it kind of gave me a little more resilience, even though at that point it hurt. So what is that you've come across in today's kind of thing, where people flock to only their like-minded sense of groups?
Mm-hmm. I think that's a really interesting question. And funnily enough, I was writing some of the things I do is I write a lot of articles in the UK for UK media about dating. And I
Mm-hmm.
got a really funny one yesterday, and the relevancy of this will become clear.
Mm-hmm.
Someone had just been rejected because she'd had a medical diagnosis of endometriosis. She needed to have children on a certain time frame.
Mm-hmm.
The guy wasn't interested in doing that. And the article was a lot of going back through the relationship, her detailing from a first person perspective about what happened in their relationship and the various, red flags or warning signs that she'd missed out on.
Mm.
And I thought, well, it's really interesting writing an article about this because to an outsider, it felt like what that article was seeking to do was to seek validation, really, and to be
Mm.
like, yeah, you know what, that was really horrible. He was really mean to you. And
Yeah.
I'm not here to judge if he was mean or not mean,
Yeah.
but it was that need for comfort and the need for other people to agree with someone's viewpoint. And I think that's what happens when we get rejected, and it can happen in more subtle ways than that. It can be, oh, wasn't that a weird message that person sent me? Or how could they just leave after we had spent those days together and they never got back in touch? I think it's really easy to end up, dare I say, also vilifying our potential dates or interactions or people who reject us because it's painful. And a way that our initial reaction sometimes to that pain is, well, this is a really horrible person.
Yeah.
And I actually think the really good stuff, often the really good learns, having, been that person who vilified my exes and blamed them for everything. I think sometimes the really good stuff is in looking at what, if any, your part was in creating that experience, being part of it. Sometimes bad things just happen to us, but a lot of the time I think we co-create our relationships. And unless we get back to the root cause of how we've co-created an experience, we can't be accountable, and then we can't create change. So I think it's okay in that moment of rejection to experience that pain and want to vent and get your friends or your family or people you trust around you to be partisan and support your worldview. But I think once you've done a bit of processing there, then it's also helpful to be challenged and to understand, okay, what was my part in that?
Yeah, it seems, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I mean, don't correct me if I'm wrong. Please do correct me because I have no clue. I'm just pondering this idea of you kind of attract what you put out, right?
I believe so. Lots of people might find that. I think that sentiment of you attract what you put out. Lots of people might be like, oh, that's trite. That's an Instagram meme. But I think there's truth in it. I think it's very hard there's several things. For instance, if you say, oh, I want someone who's got this, that, and the other quality, do you have those qualities yourself? That's usually a good place to start. And I think it's also very difficult to help someone to experience an emotion that you're not really feeling yourself. So if you absolutely hate dating, you hate it, it's the worst thing ever, and many, many people do, but you'd like to have experienced joy or playfulness with your dates and partners, it's not really a great surprise if you're not feeling that, if your current emotional state isn't in that way. However, the challenge becomes, if you have had some bad experiences, if you've experienced rejection, if you've been hurt and let down, as most people have in some way or another, then how do you move past those feelings, and how can you still approach dating with, openness, with playfulness, with joy, not being judgmental, not being jaded? So I think that's the real challenge for people, is to change that energetically around dating.
Yeah, but another aspect of that attracting what you put out is kind of this sense that if you enter, again, it works on the same stereotype model. When you kind of have an end in sight to a date, like for instance, could be a date, or when you meet someone, you project this. I need this to end in a certain way, be it as this person's my soulmate or my partner, or I have to have this at the end of it. Does that set a certain context which is, I don't know, healthy or not healthy? And does that happen often?
I do think people go into dates with, people go into dates with expectations. Yes. Does
Right.
that frame, and that, as you said, the expectations could be as wildly different as I must find a partner before my next birthday, or I must have sex with this person because otherwise this date's a failure. It could be
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
getting or taking something on a physical level,
Yeah.
or it could be an expectation for for a long-term relationship. And either way, whenever we go into expectation, we project far into the future, we start making assumptions, although we all do this, and I have done this, I am guilty.
Yeah. Yeah. I lived 2 years
It
to snog
doesn't
a bird.
help. It doesn't, I'm not saying this from the perspective of I've completely did this right
Yeah.
100% of the time, but I just observe that it's not helpful. I think the more of a blank slate you can come, and it could be simple things that you can do, like for instance, if you're talking about your date to your friends and you're like, I think, we're so, we get on so well, or we seem so perfect, for each other. They've got such a great sense of humor. If you can just say, maybe, maybe at the end, just finish the sentence with maybe.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes as well, by keeping an openness to the fact that your initial impression is wrong. And lots of people might find this, you might find this funny, but lots of people find that very difficult because they'll be like, well, I'm an experienced dater. I've been on lots of dates. I know what I want. I know what I'm looking for. Well, perhaps you actually don't. Perhaps actually it's going back to the drawing board of being radically open-minded. Perhaps that, and again, the ability to be wrong there is really powerful, because it might, as much as it might mean, yes, this person who seems great might turn out to not be a great partner for you. Equally, it can mean that someone who perhaps doesn't have that initial strong first impression equally could be a good partner to you. So it also keeps the possibility open to be positively surprised as well.
Yeah, it sounds like maybe too much experience in this field isn't a good thing.
Well, I think it's interesting you said that. Something I'm really interested in at the moment is experience obviously brings wisdom, but I also feel in dating, there's some aspects of dating almost in a youthful, unimpressioned way, which are really helpful. So a lot of people find that they have more enjoyable dating lives when they're snogging birds on the dance floor when they're 20 than they do 10 or 20 or more years later. And I think that's because what's changed, well, apart from wanting to snog someone, perhaps you don't have any outcome that you're really chasing. You're just playing and exploring and experiencing things. There's no pressure to reach an end goal in a particular time frame. All of your friends are in exactly the same boat, so that's also helpful. It's not that everybody's started to get coupled up and you feel like you're the last single person left standing.
Yeah.
And also you have a sort of untarnished perspective. You perhaps are more open and more able. You haven't yet narrowed down and perhaps become overly rigid in what you're looking for. So I think the ideal is to take some of the knowledge about yourself and how you relate to people, but also to marry that with some of the perspective that you had when you first started out. As I said, that open-mindedness and that joy and that ability to experience things.
Yeah, that sounds really that sounds like a good way, because it's almost like you're taking your knowledge, applying a little bit of wisdom, but also kind of going back into the unknown with those tools, right? But
yes, because you are in the unknown.
yeah,
Even if you'd love to know on a first date that whether this person's going to be your life partner, or you're only going to know them for 3 hours, it is unknowable. So
yeah,
it's once you accept it's unknowable and you stop trying to overanalyze and figure stuff out, it might actually also be a nicer experience for you.
But I just want to understand this idea of uncertainty, right? Because a lot of people don't want uncertainty. They want to know how things are going to roll out and pan out for them. And as a result, this could be in stage one, or like on the first date, or it could be just before they are getting married, or what. They kind of apply a certain formula, if you want to call it, or a certain prediction that they want to make their man into a certain way, or they want to make their woman into a certain way, control the outcome of the relationship, or not even the outcome of the relationship, but how the relationship manifests, right? They have a plan. Some people are more plan oriented, like in 3 years we'll have kids, in 5 years those kids are off to school. You know what I mean? So what happens when a situation which has an element of the unknown is dealt to people like these who want to control the person in the relation or person in the situation. They want to kind of have this projection of where they take it, and they also want to make their partner into something that they think. So all these various things of controlling, right? So what happens in that context?
Okay, so the first thing you want to look at there is, I would say, quite honestly, that if you want to control the end result outcome, which is, I'd like to be in a relationship in the nearer, let's say not 3 years, let's say in the nearer future.
Yeah,
Let's not keep it too timeline focused. If you are that person, your process to get there is so important. And even though it may feel more efficient to do things like, you know what, if I'm on a dating app, I'm just going to ask somebody out on a first message because I'm going to cut to the chase. I haven't got time to mess around. Or I'm going to stick with this person because I've already invested a year in the relationship, and I can't, just start back over again. Whilst it might feel efficient, it's actually, or the other way you could say it might feel efficient to come to a conclusion on a first, second, or third date. This person is perfect, and that's it. Might feel efficient is actually highly inefficient because you end up again stuck then in things that are very anchored in views that perhaps aren't working for you. Whilst if you maintain more openness at the beginning of the process, it's like if you go on, so let me rephrase this. If you go on a third date, at the end of the third date, an interviewer walks into the room and says, "So is this your life partner?" How accurate do you think your assessment is going to be? And you may feel like you really know people well, but I'd say a lot of the time you're going to be wrong. So it's like, if you try and take an early conclusion and run with it, ultimately you will more likely to be wrong and waste more of your time. If you can be more flexible and more go with the flow, and I say this as a very ungo with the flow person myself. I live and die by my Google Calendar and my children's schedules. Like, I am the ultimate planner. It's my love language. But I've learned that you just can't plan for it. And when you do, that's actually when you waste more time. And remember, it isn't about any one person. There's lots of people who you could have that emotionally intimate, connected experience with. There are many people who could probably be good partners to you. So it's not about getting this one person to fall in love with you in the way that you want. It's actually about developing a process that helps you to meet one of the many people who can be that long-term partner for you.
It's fascinating because it's so many. Sometimes you just look at your relationships at home with family, and there's so many nuances, right? Like things that you say to get a reaction, things that you do to sort of instigate, and then you kind of go meet an unknown person and then just expect things to fall into place, which is like, it's not going to happen that easily, But I was also reading about this thing called perceptual diversity, where each person views the world in a different way, and it's fascinating, right? When you apply that to a context like dating, when someone has a certain way they smell something, certain way they look at something they find attractive, something they find repulsive, or something they find emotionally really sort of soothing. There's so many things, and you slap that with the context of today's thing, where so many things are polarized. You either are liberal or you're conservative. You're either pro-life or you're anti-abortion. You're pro-life or you're pro-choice. There's so many extremes there. So, and then you put it in a city like London or New York, which is so diverse culturally and racially and ethnically. And how does it fit? Like, let's talk about London since you live there. How do people even kind of find a common ground?
I often find, actually, when it comes to common ground, that people will have more things in common than they expect. Even if they come from diverse backgrounds, I think often there's common human experiences that we can relate on. The problem could be that you may never get to that common ground because it can be hard to be emotionally intimate with people we don't know very well. So perhaps you're going on to a first date and you have an idea of who you think they'd like you to be, or what an attractive person is. So you start to try and behave in that way. Perhaps you just simply find it difficult being open with people you don't know. In England, we've obviously also mastered the art form of small talk. So perhaps you have this small talk where you just never really get to a deeper level of conversation. In all of these things, you could be missing perfectly good opportunities to really connect and to relate to someone, but it's because we don't go there in the conversations and the interactions that we have. It's not I personally think it's not the opportunity doesn't exist.
Yeah, I find that in today's thing we have with the extremes, right? Like, I forget the person. He was recently pulled off YouTube. He was this guy in the UK who was, what I'm talking about? The guy who was
I do know who you're talking about. I think it's good that I
Andrew
perhaps don't remember his name.
Andrew Tate.
Is this
Is that what
is
it
the
is?
really misogynistic person?
Yeah, I think Andrew Tate
Yeah,
or
yeah.
something like that, right?
Yeah.
So you have one side, you have people like him who are so-called role models for men, which I hope not, but telling them to do all this vile stuff, which then they say, no, I didn't mean it in that context. But then you have the other side where you have, of course, there are feminists, but then you have the people who are saying all men need to apologize for what men have done in the past, which both extremes are not, I think, not healthy.
Yes.
But then you have some women who come with this notion of feminism, or some men with this idea of masculinity. Or how does that even work? Because it's so toxic for the woman or the man in that relationship. When you have, say, in case of a man whose partner is like, you are nothing, and you need to shut your mouth because men are horrible beings. Or then you have a woman who's being abused or being similarly spoken to. How does one avoid getting into that trap, either as the abused or the abuser?
For someone who, and perhaps, for people who are experiencing that, they may experience it in a way that's more subtle. It could be like, I hate dating. All men are this.
Yeah.
They don't want commitment anymore. Men are just average and women are great. It could be, people say things like that quite often. Someone said this to me once. They said, if you really want something, you can't get close to something if you dislike it. So it's like, I hate rich people. Yeah, awful. Well, you might that might potentially put a block to you ever creating wealth. And I think it's the same with relationships. When we go into blame, we just blame whoever the other party, whoever that is that we want to attract. Obviously, we were using examples of man to woman, but there's lots of other permutations of that. When you hate, when you dislike, when you criticize, when it's their fault, again, when you lack accountability or blame rests with them, you're not going to move closer to the kind of relationship that you want. And so I think if that's something that's coming up for you, if I hear someone saying that's if I'm speaking to them, that's an automatic flag to me as being like, that's your first port of call of something to work on. It's how can I like and enjoy this more? And it could even be, like my friends who are in relationships, they just become so boring, or I can't get a hold of them anymore. They're disappointing to me. It's like, well, if you would actually like, your end result is you would like to have a similar relationship to them, how can you take a step back from hate or envy, and how can you actually move forwards into empathy or understanding or connecting with them more? Obviously, if you're in a abusive relationship, I think I've been myself. I think, again, there's shades of that, and I think many people have experienced that. At least I can't speak for all society. Many societies don't have support networks for that. The society I speak from in London definitely does. So it is one Google away from getting support and help, which is what you need. And everything, what's really difficult about it is when people are stuck in abusive relationships, often it's because, obviously, if they thought about the entirety of the relationship, it would be bad, but we focus on the good bits, right? No one's in a relationship that's bad all the time, or maybe has historically been bad all the time. There was at least some time there which felt romantic and exciting or positive or good, or there was some connection. And it is actually choosing not to idealize the person and going, you know what, today, this is the relationship. me feeling sad or distressed, or they've just cut me off, or they've dumped me again out of the blue, or something worse. This is it. It's not that, great first few dates I had with them. This is it. And it's only going to get worse. That's a
Yeah.
fundamental trend. It's only going to get worse. So I think this is, again, coming to that point of acceptance when you've given a lot to a relationship, when you've invested time, energy, money into something, can be really, really difficult. But again, it's sunk cost fallacy. It's like, this is the relationship. The sooner I can seek the help and spot I need to exit, the better.
Yeah, because it feels like, oh my God, it's so difficult. There's so much I'm going to be leaving behind, but that's maybe what you need to do, right?
Right. And it's also not going back to square one. Any
Yeah.
relationship ending is not a return to square one, because you have learned and developed things through that relationship. And I think this can be something, again, as a coach for dating, some things that I look at are things like, okay, what are your motivation levels like?
Yeah.
How able are you to go out there into the world and, meet and interact with all these incredible new people that I believe are out there for you? Probably, I think one of the most compelling reasons to leave a relationship which isn't serving you or is toxic or however you want to frame it, is that it can obviously impact your ability to be playful, joyful, open-minded when you meet someone new who could actually give you a relationship that's really rewarding and fulfilling. So it's like, it's also for your future self and your future ability to go into that world with, even if your past experiences haven't been great, with openness to the fact that you could have the experiences that you want in the future. And that's so, so important.
Yeah, it's tremendously. I think these dating is obviously the tool to get into a relationship, or one of the things that sort of make your human experience more fulfilling in some way, right? You have fun, you go out, you don't feel as alone sometimes. But say you get beyond that, and today I want to understand, because you mentioned you have kids, and my wife and I, we have a 4-month-old baby girl now.
Oh.
And yeah, it's quite a interesting way to look at life, thinking about her, now what she's going to be growing up in, the environment. And because a lot of us are shaped by what we see around us with our parents, right? And the conversation, the dialogue, the relationship that they have. So for you, as a person who comes across so many relationships, we meet people who date, eventually get into a relationship, and you have people who are same-sex parents, people who are single parents, people who are parents of different sex. And also then you have this thing of social media. You have this world where you hear of stories where there are teenage girls who don't fit in, so they get a sex change and they become a boy, and then they identify and they celebrate for that. So I'm just saying there's a little bit of stuff packed into this, but what is the thing that we can do as parents to give a sense of context to children in this changing environment? Because there is a lot more available at a lot younger age, you know what I mean, to unformed minds.
Well, I probably have to defer to some more experienced parents. My children are quite young
Yeah.
still.
Yeah.
My current game plan is radical honesty.
Right. And no
Because
phones.
yeah, probably minimum. Well, we were already on minimizing screen time, and I hear my 2-year-old going, iPad, in a fit of rage.
Sorry, how old are your kids? You said one is.
I've got one who's got a girl who's 7 months and a boy
Ah.
who's 2.5. So
Oh, so your
hands
girl's
up.
okay, almost a little older than my girl. Yeah.
Yeah, yes, yeah. That's why I was like, oh, I know what that's like.
Yeah.
But that's, I think being candid is, I'm of the camp of being candid is a really good idea. Funnily enough, my grandmother, who would be over 100 now, she often remarks that during her generation, she was dating during the Blitz, World War II, in London. And she said that her dad, when she was 13-year-old, sat her down and just laid it out for her. It was quite unconventional for the time about different sexualities and things that could happen. But I think she was eternally grateful for that, because she didn't feel, she didn't perhaps, although I think she felt that she didn't have so much naivety around things. And people can, including your children especially, could always choose to ignore your advice.
Yeah, yeah.
But I think being open, and so I think again having an open dialogue is important. If they're feeling stressed or the situation, or someone has let them down, you'd like to be the person that they turn around and be able to talk to. And I say this in a very idealistic way. As I said, my son is managing like 5-word sentences, so we're not really into deep emotional exchange other than pad.
Yeah.
But that's my hope. My hope is to be candid. My hope is that we can maintain a really open dialogue. My hope is to spend lots of time together as a family, so he doesn't feel like he needs to go find his tribe, in something else or something darker.
Yeah.
And also to be a realist. I hope that as a coach, I am a pragmatist and a realist. So for instance, it might be, what, if you want to snog a bird, or you want to have a one night stand, perhaps go first of all, tell people what you're doing and go back to your house, rather than go get in a car or go somewhere that you don't know and you're not safe, so I'd rather, I'm definitely full personally, and I know this is something that people have very different moral perspectives and opinions on. I sit firmly myself, I think, in the camp of just be a realist, be open about it, try and provide safe or safer alternatives rather than assume it's not going to happen.
Yeah, I think, it's nice to know. I mean, I agree with you, because sometimes people might say it's too much information. They're not ready for it, But I think I would have benefited from it. Not just knowing the right terminology, but also just understanding how these things work, rejection, one night stands, knowing that someone might appreciate you for a few times or a few dates or a few outings and then realize there's something different, or even how to behave. And I know this might sound trivial after what we've spoken about, but is there something that, like, for instance, I'll just use my my past as an example in this context. I used to be terrified going on a date with someone, with a girl, because I was really worried that I will make a fool of myself because of my eye condition. That I won't be able to find her. And I joke about this on stage sometimes, but I'll sit at the wrong table. I won't know what to order. I won't be able to read the menu card. I won't be able to read or pick up the check, or I might make a fool by knocking something over. And as a result, I never met a girl on a date, I think maybe once on Valentine's Day. And I think I was panicking for 2 days before, and I kind of went there 1 hour early. I went and found the right chair so I would look cool. The entire thing was sort of so orchestrated that it was stressful. So it led to a stage where I would only meet girls when I was smashed out of my mind after like a few drinks. So that would be the cool son, and it became a problem, right? I could never, like, even when someone I would meet, eventually then my girlfriend who became my wife, it was, I think, almost like 3 years after we started dating, I went out on a meal sober with her. So yeah, it's something, I'm just sort of using my case as something you can maybe help tell people why that happens.
Well, I think lots of people go on dates trying to be cool, and I think lots of people, whether there's, whether it's a pre-existing kind of medical condition, something in their past, their socioeconomic status, their ethnicity, like there's a lot of things that we can feel anxious about during the early stages of dating, and we can try and hide from that anxiety. Using alcohol or drugs makes it dissipates, or at least gives you the impression that you are displacing the anxiety. Again, really, really difficult. But I think, again, the start point there is about, again, perspective and outlook. It's like you're actually not on, like, the most cool or the most self-assured thing to know is that you're not on that date to impress somebody else. You don't need to impress them. You need to do a relatively okay job of communicating who you are. You need to arrive at that date in a relatively okay, no one is perfect, state in your own life, so that you have some degrees of stability or self-awareness and to give to that other person to form a partnership. And then it's like, if it's not a match, it's not a match. It's actually not all on you. Then one of the most incredible things someone could give you is that feeling of, that you're accepted for who you are. And that can feel really difficult because again, we go a bit trite, or like a nice dating piece of advice that people have heard many times before is, oh, just be yourself. And people are like, well, I've tried being myself and hasn't worked out very, very well. But again, I would think, have you really, or has anxiety, fear of rejection, some construct of how you think you should behave, has that got in the way? Have you perhaps not connected with the people who understand you and can relate to you well? Is there something about yourself and in your life you're not actually happy or happy enough? Do you not have enough self-acceptance? Is there something like, dare I say it, again, alcohol or drugs or something else that's really impacting your self-esteem and ability to relate to someone in a way that you would expect them to like you genuinely for how you are today? So I think, again, the truism itself might not feel that, people might be like, oh, that's just ridiculous. But I think there's grains of truth in it. And I think, again, your good kind of guidance for a first date, if you can get there, is to look to be authentic enough. You're not going to be 100% authentic with someone you've met on a first date. Again, it's unrealistic, but degrees of authenticity, not needing a perfect performance, and recognizing that there's also things that they have to do to make this date work. And if it doesn't work, it's not a failing or all your fault.
From what you're saying, it almost sounds like when you go dating, you don't really need to go on a date. You just need to go to a therapist. You just
maybe do the therapist bit first. Do it at the same time. Because we don't need to be finished articles, right? Because the right people, again, the right partners will those imperfections that we all have, they won't bother the right partners so much, or they'll find some way that they will balance us out, or they'll help to calm us down or ground us.
It's fascinating. We've always been told that the relationship is the ultimate goal for someone single, right? To find someone. But it almost sounds, and it from experience, it feels also that a relationship is just the beginning of, or rather it's a means to this human experience, that you can figure out what you are doing or what you're meant to do through exposing and laying out your vulnerabilities, kind of making peace with stuff that you weren't happy about and not comfortable about accepting, and your ideas of self-worth and the ideas of what gives you fulfillment and joy through this person who kind of reflects back what they want and what you want in some way. So it's almost like it's this idea to something beyond just the two of you, or just this idea that I found someone.
And it's really interesting in the world of dating advice as well, particularly men's dating advice. It slows down after snog a bird, and it entirely drops off a cliff after take a woman back to your apartment. That's it. And the irony is, I think the bigger work is maintaining and building the relationship that follows. And there isn't an end goal, or there isn't an end goal, because even if you're in a really successful, happy, long-term relationship, you're still experiencing challenges together. You'll both change or evolve somewhat as people. You might have children or other things that really shift the dynamic of the relationships. So it's almost like infinite. It's kind of endless. And likewise, I don't think it's always a superior state of being. I think that sometimes we can think that being single is lesser. And being in a relationship is better. And yes, if that's what you want, being in a happy relationship is amazing. But it's so much better to be single. Going back to this, one of my grandmother's quotes: better to be left on the shelf than locked in the wrong cupboard.
Yeah, that's nice.
There's lots of things you can learn on the shelf, So I think singleness can be a really fantastic period in your life, as can be in a really fantastic relationship, or you can be unhappy single or unhappy in a relationship.
Yeah. No, that's quite crazy that we give so much rigid definition to one state or the other, right? Which kind of it's good in this way, it's bad in this way, it's better this way, it's better this way. So it just kind of makes the entire thing so it makes it so outcome oriented as opposed to the experience, right? But I,
Exactly.
I want to understand, h- about your journey, if and how did your experience shape what you're doing now? I mean, why did you? I mean, what led you to this course of work and this way of thinking and looking at life and helping people?
I think what led me to this course is, usually it's, as I think lots of people experience, is a way of dealing with like of pain
Mm.
or lack of knowledge or, disappointment or difficult emotions. So I think like many people, I've had the classic things, being a bit of a geeky outsider teenager, experiencing rejection, the usual stuff.
Hmm.
And then was quite naive, again, usual stuff. Then by chance, I stumbled across this community of pickup artists, which is,
Mm.
that's sort of like the nebulous underbelly of the dating industry, which
Mm.
is men teaching other men how to seduce women. And it
Oh, okay.
sounds terrible on paper. In my experience, there are coaches that are doing really, really good work in
Okay.
helping men. There are
Right.
other coaches who are doing really horrible things and who are
Right.
spreading terrible messages. But again, I'd be careful not to say that it's all bad.
Yeah. Yeah.
And really, what that world gave me, though, is this insight that you could, through inner work or, practical skills, there were things you could try and do to learn to master this area. And that, again, really appealed to me because at the time I was like, great, I can master this. That means, of course, I can create this sort of superhero version of myself that's never going to be ultra confident, do all the things that I never could ever dream of doing, and who
Yeah.
probably won't have to experience rejection. And then after, going from the geeky girl to the woman who, had all the cool friends and the cool invites and the cool boyfriend, all this cool stuff, obviously realized that was pretty vapid and empty. And that also a lot of the relationships I was choosing, apart from the fact they look cool on paper, were, deeply toxic and just made loads of really bad decisions. Again, I think this is pretty common
Mm.
for someone in their 20s.
Yeah.
I don't think I'm much of an exception there. And I sort of had some particularly bad life events happen, and that acted a bit like a hardcore reset. And I realized I'd been obviously looking at this whole thing sort of upside down. And whilst I'd acquired all these skills, through the pickup world taught me how to teach people and how to meet lots of people in real life. So that was
Mm.
really cool. I could do that and I could teach other people to do that. It's very fun. I
Yeah.
could know how
Yeah.
to be attractive and confident in a superficial way, but I didn't really understand how to actually build meaningful relationships or find someone who actually liked me without the superhero or supervillain cape on.
Mm.
So I
Mm.
went on a little journey of self-discovery through that. And and then at the same time, that really evolved how I was teaching people as well. My company still does a lot of skill-based training because I think there's at certain stages in your life, there's a real merit in being like, you know what, I am going to learn to meet people. I'm going to be socially confident enough that I can
Mm.
start a conversation with someone. And as I said, we work with everyone. So it's not just a man to woman thing.
Yeah.
We're completely open on that front. It was also super cool for me to reverse engineer stuff and be like, okay, if I was a woman who wanted somebody to approach me, how could I do that? All those skill-based things are really fun. But
Yeah.
underpinning that, you've got to have some principles in place, which are about what are we really aiming for here, people? It
Yeah.
can't
Yeah.
be just to get 10 people's phone numbers, because you know what? That's, first of all, it's really lame.
Yeah.
It isn't actually cool.
Yeah.
And what's that? How is that serving, your end goal? As a person. So I think, like most people, as I am maturing,
Mm.
feel like I'm learning a bit more. And my big learning at the moment is to do more learning, because I'm finding the people that I think are most fascinating, interesting, accomplished people are the ones who are least rigid, most open to hearing other perspectives, most willing to learn and to graft and to go back to the beginner's mindset of maybe actually everything I've thought about so far, it might be wrong. So I'm sure if we spoke to me in 5 years' time, I hope that if you spoke to me in 5 years' time, I'd back some of the things I said during this interview and think other ones were complete rubbish. And I hope that's the trajectory I go on.
No, that's a beautiful way of looking at it, right? Because I think this idea of wrong is really undervalued. and we kind of always want to be right and say, you know what, that box is ticked, I'm done, I'm moving on to the next right thing. Well, the wrong actually might give you that perspective that you wouldn't have actually had. So it's brilliant. Thank you so much, Hayley, for sharing your story, and also I think just give me and people listening right now a little sense of what it means, because there's so much out there and so much pressure, especially in an economy and in a society kind of coming out like India, where people coming from smaller towns to larger towns, there's this pressure of money, there's this material sort of attachment to given, and also breaking away from certain traditional ways of finding a partner. There are a lot of people who are in larger families where there's a lot more pressure, there's a lot more sort of claustrophobic sensations that you can't do certain things for men and for women. There is older ways of looking at relationships, at gender roles, etc. So just for people listening right now, I think it makes sense to hear why and how and the importance and the values that are in place of why you need to be with someone, how it helps to have fun. So yeah, I mean, that's thanks so much. I think it's really, really helpful and really kind that you have shared all this.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Really happy to have come up. Really, really great questions. I really found that really fascinating. I'd say if you are a man or someone who likes to pursue in relationships, let's put it that way, you can find out more at hayleyquinn.com/attraction. And if you are a woman or someone who likes to receive, then you can head to hayleyquinn.com /circle. And, there's lots of advice out there. I'm highly Googleable. So if you're interested in hearing more advice, you can find that on the wonderful thing that's the internet.
Brilliant. And I think you should visit India, because I think this context will give you a very, very different perspective.
I would love to. It's so interesting.
Yeah, there's so many moving parts right now with there's so much need, there's so much greed, there's so much wanting, there's so much belonging, acceptance. So it's really nice. I mean, not really nice, but it's a really interesting time. Could be nice, could also not be very nice, but appreciate it. And yeah, good luck with everything and your future projects, and with your two little lovely children, and raising them, and with your family. So thank you, and all the best with everything.
Oh, thank you. You too. Take care.
Thanks, Hayley. Take care. Bye.